Today we are really honored at IGNOU to have Professor David Crystal here with us at the studios, and for generations to come we will be able to hear his voice and his views. So welcome to India, Professor David Crystal. We are indeed very grateful that you could come to IGNOU for this interview, and we hope you have a fantastic stay in India.
Well, thank you for that warm welcome. It's been a privilege to be here. It's a delight to be here and have the opportunity of talking to so many people without even seeing them. I've been looking forward to coming to India for 62 years, and now I finally have my wish.
And I hope you have a really wonderful stay.
Oh, we will indeed.
Now to get back to, or not to begin with the interview, you said in your book that language change takes place very slowly and very subtly. And yet in India in the last 5 years, we've had this amazing language change taking place, which I'm sure is a delight to sociolinguists. You know, we have this these call centers, and where young, upwardly mobile people speak for something like 8 hours a day and maybe 5 days a week with native speakers in native accents. So do you think we are going to see the arrest of Indianization of English and going to native norms, perhaps American English?
Well, whatever's happening in India at the moment, it's different from anything that's ever happened in the English language before. I'm sure of that. Let's come on to that in a moment. But to go to your first point about language change, it is generally the case that language changes in a fairly leisurely manner. It has to be, otherwise generations would not be able to understand each other.
Yes.
Grandchildren and grandparents would not be able to understand each other. But on the other hand, in the history of a language, there are periods when the language changes relatively rapidly and other periods when it changes relatively slowly.
Could you tell us a little bit about the rapid changes?
Yes, in the history of English, if you go back to the very beginning, you always get a period of rapid change after a period of major political change. Now, the first big political change, of course, we know nothing about when the Anglo-Saxons arrived in Britain in the 5th century. But the second period we know a lot about, which is when the French came in 1066 and all that, and suddenly English changed its character. Within 100 years, thousands and thousands of French words came into the English vocabulary. And then a couple of hundred years later, in the 16th century, the period of the Renaissance. Now here we have another period of rapid change because of the cultural movements in Europe. And now thousands and thousands of Latin words and Greek words, and of course Italian and Spanish and all these other vocabulary items came into English. And then 100 years later, there was the Industrial Revolution. And that was a period of rapid change. Now all the scientific terms start to come into English. Hundreds and thousands of them. I mean, hundreds and thousands of them. All the technical terms of chemistry and biology and geology and all of these things. But since the Industrial Revolution, it has been a period of relative calm until now. And the thing that's happened in the last 50 years is the arrival of English as a global language. And when a language becomes global, then suddenly amazing things start to happen to it. And here in India, where we have probably the largest English language population in the world, I mean, nobody knows exactly how many people speak English in India, but people suggest that at a conversational level, it's maybe a third of the population, something like that. Well, in that case, that's more than the combined English-speaking populations of Britain and America. So when you get a situation like that, then immediately there's going to be a period of rapid change and uncertainty. Poor teachers of English.
Poor teachers of English.
Once upon a time it was straightforward. There was British English and there was American English. And now there's all kinds of English all over the world. Australian English, South African English, and of course Indian English itself, developing in its own way. Now, there was a time, of course, when everybody felt a bit inferior about their regional English. All over the world, you know, British English was correct, or American English was correct, and our English is not correct, so we should apologize for it. Well, I hope that period is over. It's a kind of post-imperialism linguistic way of thinking. Every local dialect of English that has grown around the world has now its own vitality, its own identity, its own correctness. Who am I to say that the way you speak English in India is in any sense incorrect or inferior? I've got one dialect of English that I use, you have another dialect of English that you use. These are equally valid varieties of English. Of course, historically, we're always looking over our shoulder at the past. You know, once upon a time, British English was the dominant force and so on. But I hope in a more mature democracy, people are prepared to see that their own local variety of English has immense strength, immense richness, and should not always be worried about it and apologizing for it.
Yes.
Call centers, of course, are a very interesting and new phenomenon. Nobody can ever predict the future with language change, and as I sit here now in 2004, I do not know what the impact of call centers is going to be on the language as a whole, but I would be very surprised if it had much influence, frankly. Very surprised. It is, after all, a very specialized area of communication, isn't it? A call center interaction, where we're talking on the telephone without the benefit of simultaneous feedback. I can see your face, you can see mine, and we react to each other as we're talking to each other. A call center interaction tends to be on a specialist topic with a restricted range of interest, and therefore whatever style of language evolves to meet the needs of that situation, it is unlikely, I think, that it is going to affect the general trend in the English language in the country as a whole. And that general trend is to express Indian identity in its own way.
Why I ask this question and why it's a little, if not worrying, but interesting. It's a young population that, and it's almost every household almost is infected by this bug, because you know, it's quick money, and young people go there for 2 years, and they pick up this language, and it's like a washback. So they, you know, carry it on because it's a bit attractive. It's like the movies. You know, it's you know, it's a bit attractive.
Yes.
So perhaps it might be just a young thing for a little while.
Yes.
But there could be a washback, and that's interesting to, you know, maybe in 10 years' time we could.
Yes, there could be indeed, and probably there will be to some extent. Slang has its fashion. The chief use of slang is to show that you're one of the gang, as they say. And slang has a vitality, but it is also evanescent. It is transitional. Slang, on the whole, does not last very long. Occasionally, a slang word will enter the standard language. I mean, a good example is the word bus. In the 18th century, it was omnibus, and bus was very slangy, and you certainly didn't use the word bus if you were speaking in a proper way. But of course, today, bus is the perfectly normal standard English word. People don't think of it as a colloquialism anymore. It's a normal word for the vehicle that you drive in, that you sit in. Now, therefore, occasionally slang words do come into the language, but it's not very common. The whole point about slang is that it gives you an alternative to the standard language. The standard language is an enormous educated gang of people. Slang gives you that local, small group identity. And therefore there isn't really much motivation for the two to cross.
Yes.
Now when young people develop a new side of slang, a new variety of the language, and they think it's cool, or to use some of the more modern terminology, it's wicked, or it's evil. You know, all these words are coming into English now.
Sinful.
Sinful. And all these words mean good things. Isn't that extraordinary that all the bad words are now meaning good things? That's right.
Yes.
Well, when people start using a new variety like this, they don't usually replace their other varieties with it. They add an extra variety to the language that they've already got. So a good example, of course, is the current vogue for text messaging on mobile phones. You see, here's a perfect example of a new variety of the language that has developed in the last 5 years. 5 years ago, nobody was text messaging, and now everybody is doing it. Now, what has happened? Does it mean that the rest of the language has been influenced by text messaging? Of course not. All that's happened, really, is that a new style has evolved to meet a new technology with new things to do, and we have added an extra dimension to the language that wasn't there before. And if you look at the history of English over the past few hundred years, what you see is not old varieties changing, but new varieties being added to the old ones. So the language is getting bigger and bigger and bigger all the time.
Yes, you talked about text messaging. So let's go to the internet. You've talked a lot about it in the Language Revolution, and you have a book as well on
Language and the internet.
Yes. And do you think this is going to be something like a impermanent language change, because teachers are grumbling about spelling errors, they're grumbling about minimal punctuation, and they're grumbling about written language which is highly informal.
You mustn't grumble about it. No, enjoy it, of a new variety of language that has come into being.
Okay.
This is the most exciting development in language I've seen in years, the internet. Now, teachers, of course, are the most responsible of individuals. Yes. There is no more difficult job than teaching a language, that's sure. And the job of the teacher is, of course, to inform their children about how language should be used. Now, spoken language is one thing, written language is another thing. When you're teaching children to write, one of the things you do is you tell them, now, spoken language is very colloquial, and it would be inappropriate to use spoken language slang and so on in written language expression. We expect written language to be formal, and that is what you would teach the children to do. And over the period of years, they learn to write formal letters and formal text, and to distinguish spoken language from written language, and the teacher does that job. Now, along comes a new medium, a third medium of communication. There hasn't been a new medium of communication for 10,000 years.
Yes.
Speech is 50,000 years old or more. Writing is 10,000 years old. And since then there has been no new medium. And now the internet has come along. We have a new medium. Now, teachers will take time to react to it, but they mustn't react to it by saying, it's bad, it's awful, we must stop it, don't let it into the classroom. I mean, that way you just get laughed at. This is the biggest thing that's happened to human society in a long time, from a communicational point of view, I mean, and from perhaps a social point of view as well. It is really a revolution. And so what you have to do is not grumble about it, but manage it. See it as an opportunity. Now, what sort of opportunity is it?
Yes.
It is an opportunity where, for the first time, we get the chance of seeing the written language in its most naked form. Think what an email is, or a chat room interaction. It is me sitting at a screen, and there's nobody else there. Right now, I'm talking to you, you can react to me, correct me, ask me a question, but when I'm at my screen, nobody can do this. My message is mine. Until I press go and send it, nobody knows it's there in the entire world. Once I've sent it, everybody can see it. And so the pressure is on me as a user of the email to get that email right. So in fact, there is considerable pressure for me to be precise.
Yes.
Now, at the moment, people are rather vague about it. It's a new technology. But slowly, people are realizing that they can't just go, send it.
Yes.
Because what happens is that they get a message back saying, what did you mean? Sorry, I didn't understand that. Send it again. And they're really, I better be a bit more careful next time. And slowly, emails are becoming more formal as time goes by. The average age of people using the internet 5 years ago was 23, 24. Now the average age is in the mid-30s. So that older people are using the internet for email and chat rooms now. The oldest person I know who uses the internet is an 86-year-old grandmother who uses it to talk to her grandchildren. And so the internet is slowly becoming a little bit more formal. Therefore, one ought to foster this. The role of the teacher is to work with children to show them how to use this new technology in a way which will benefit them as dynamic internet users.
Yes.
And not to worry too much if on occasion the children decide to use it in a more informal way. And this is the most amazing thing, that the written language on the internet now, you can actually use it in a more informal way than ever before.
Yes.
It is perfectly possible,
Yes,
as you say,
yes.
for me to write an email, and I do it a lot. Now here am I, a professor of linguistics. I am happy to write an email in which I have no capital letters,
Yes.
no punctuation marks,
yes.
because I'm fast.
Yes.
And I just want the message. I don't want to press the shift key down all the time. I will write the letter, the word I, meaning me, with a small I. And if my typing goes wrong, and I misspell a word or two, I'm not going to go back to the beginning and painfully change every spelling to get it right. I haven't got time. I will just send it off, knowing that the person at the other end who receives this email is not going to look at it and say, oh dear, Professor Crystal can't punctuate, Professor Crystal can't spell, Professor Crystal doesn't know how to use capital letters.
Yes.
No, that's not how we react to emails.
Yes.
We react to emails by introducing a new set of tolerances into our linguistic system. It's a whole new set of linguistic clothes, the email, and I think we ought to appreciate the fact that suddenly we're allowed to be more informal with language than ever before. But not, of course, at the expense of losing our ability to be formal with the internet when we need to be. And that's the job of the teacher, to teach the child when to be informal and it's permissible, when to be formal and it's permissible. Just like with clothing.
Yes.
Use informal clothes on one situation, use formal clothes on another situation.
Yes.
It's the same with language.
It's the same with language, okay. It's very clear now. Very, very clear indeed. Thank you so much.
Well, I have to say I am grateful too, because the opportunity of talking to you like this and with such a wide audience potentially seeing the program one day, it's been a delight. Thank you for your interest.
Thank you.